So my guess is that some of you answered yes to this question, and some of you answered no to the first question. Is it actually possible? But as you read through the Bible, and especially as you read through the New Testament and these letters that are being written to this early community of Jesus followers, the answer they seem to communicate again and again is that yes, it is actually possible to become like Jesus. And here's what I think is challenging for us, is that we know us. We know, we try really hard, some of us, to be like Jesus. And it doesn't seem like we're getting a whole lot of progress. It doesn't feel like we're accomplishing all that we want to. And so we look at this and we go, it's got to be impossible for us to be like Jesus. Or we'll say, you know what, I can never be like Jesus because I sin. Because that automatically makes it so I can never be like Jesus. And it's almost like we use that as an excuse to ignore some of the things in Scripture that say, hey, there's a better way to live. There's a different life that we're trying to live into. And that's going to be kind of the heart behind this series is, if the Bible says that it's possible to become like Jesus, if the writers of the New Testament want us to get the idea in our minds that it is actually possible to become like him, then how do we go about doing that? Because that's kind of the whole goal there. If we're trying to be like Jesus, then that's kind of a necessary question to ask. How does it actually happen? And so today I want us to look at a couple of places, but really in one primary spot. So if you have your Bibles, turn to Romans chapter 12. Romans chapter 12, and we're going to look at verses 1 and 2. Paul, who's writing this, says, "Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will." So this is one of those verses that is actually an oxymoron. Who knows what an oxymoron is? Okay, an oxymoron is when two words that don't go together are put together. Like jumbo shrimp. Like those are not two words that should go together, but at times they do. And it shouldn't make sense, but in some way it is. It's just a bigger shrimp than a normal shrimp. And here's why I don't necessarily think that we believe this is an oxymoron. It's because of how we view that word sacrifice. I think for us, in our current culture, is a sacrifice is doing something hard. So giving up my phone is a sacrifice because that's a challenge. Right? If I had to give up my phone and not use it while someone is talking or when someone is trying to interact with me, if I were to just actually engage fully in the place where I'm at, that's a challenge. And so it's a sacrifice when I actually do that. And so I think we associate the word sacrifice with doing something challenging. It's a sacrifice to not eat sugar. It's a sacrifice to go on a diet, right? There's a good thing as a result, but it's hard. But we have to remember who is being talked to, and what would they think when they think of what Paul's talking about. And when Paul says, offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, he's saying, hey, sacrifices are equated with dead things. This is going back to the Old Testament. So when we read the New Testament, we have to keep the Old Testament in mind because a lot of what the writers are doing are referring back to things and understandings that the people would have based off of that. So a sacrifice required them taking something and killing it. It required taking an animal, their best animal, putting it on the altar, slitting its throat, and pouring out all the blood. There was death involved. And so that's how we need to be thinking when we think of a living sacrifice. This is where the oxymoron part comes in, because a living sacrifice shouldn't work because a sacrifice requires death. So what is Paul talking about here? Why would he use this language? And the reason he uses this language is because he has somebody in mind. He's trying to point us back to Jesus, who flips the narrative for us. Because for most of us, the way we think about life is you are born and then you die. There's life and then there's death. But Jesus changes the reality of all of this because it's no longer is death the end point, it's now the starting point. You go from death to life. And so Jesus is this model, this picture for us of what a living sacrifice looks like. To say there's a way of life that I'm going to die to in order to live this new life that Jesus came and lived and died so that I could live. That's what Paul's trying to get at here. This living sacrifice is intended to show us a person of Jesus. So he says, offer your body as a living sacrifice. To say, you know what? There's this old way of living. There's this old way of seeing the world. And instead of choosing to live that life, I'm going to die to that life. So I'm going to choose life instead of death. I'm going to choose to follow Jesus into areas that are not normal for our culture. I'm going to choose to die to my old way of thinking and offer my body to Jesus as a way of trying to live out a life of worship. Because look at how he follows this up. This is your true and proper worship. When you offer to Jesus your life as a living sacrifice, this is a life of worship. And what we don't mean by that is like John is not going to follow you with his guitar and be like, hey, this is what life of worship looks like, where he's singing behind you like a traveling minstrel. That's not what he's trying to get at here. Because for the life of like the writers of the Bible, worship is so much more than just music. Worship is a way of living your life, of which music can be a part. And so it's living my life in a way where I'm saying to God, you know what, I'm going to choose to look for the way of life that is honorable and pleasing to you, that is holy, set apart for you. And so when I live my life, when I go throughout my day, I'm not going to choose to just go along with the flow. I'm not going to choose to just think the way everyone else thinks. What I'm going to do is I'm going to choose to see the world the way Jesus sees the world. I'm going to offer it up to him. I'm going to say, Jesus, how should I look at this situation? What should my response be? How should I act? What should I say? Where should I go? All of it is I'm choosing to die to this old way of life and saying, Jesus, use me. My life is open to you to use. And that's a life of worship. And that is what is holy and pleasing to God. Another way that Paul talks about this earlier in Romans is in Romans chapter 6. Verses 11 through 14, he says this. In the same way, count yourself dead to sin, but alive to God in Christ Jesus. Therefore, don't let sin reign in your mortal body so that you obey its evil desires. Do not offer any part of yourself to sin as an instrument of wickedness, but rather offer yourselves to God as those who have been brought from death to life, and offer every part of yourself to him as an instrument of righteousness. For to be your master, because you're not under the law, but under grace. This should sound familiar if you've been downstairs at all. There's a new way of seeing the world. This is what a life transformed looks like. And I think part of our challenge comes in the next set of verses. And so here's a couple of questions that I want you to think about, talk about. First one, what are some ways that we conform to the pattern of this world? Because in verse 2, that's what he talks about, right? He says, don't conform to the pattern of this world. So what are some ways that we do that? Where we live into what the world says we should live into? Where we just think the way the world tells us we should think? What are some places where you see that show up? And then secondly, what do you think it means to be transformed by the renewing of your mind? Go ahead and take a couple minutes and talk about that at your tables. So here's one example. If you're kind of struggling to have a picture in your mind of what this could look like, one way that we're just conformed to the pattern of this world, one thing that I don't think that we have to be taught, that we just naturally pick up on, is this idea of consumerism, right? There's not anything that we have to be, like, there's no class that has to teach us how to spend money, get stuff, make ourselves happy through buying stuff. Like, that's not something that most of us have to be formally taught. It's just we grow up in a culture where this naturally happens. We live in a world with commercials. We live in a world with ads, and we just are used to it. But all of these are saying to us, hey, you need this. Your life isn't good enough the way it is. You should buy stuff. You should make yourself happy. It just naturally happens, and without necessarily thinking, you know what, I'm going to choose to be a consumerist. Like, it's just, we do it. We just go and we go, yep, I'm going to buy stuff. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. It's natural for us. David Foster Wallace gave this really famous graduation speech, and he talks about this example where there's two fish who are swimming along, and an older fish swims by and says, hey boys, how's the water? And they kind of keep swimming along, and they go, what the heck is water? Right? Like, they don't know. Fish don't know that they're in water. They know that they're in the world that they live in. And so for someone to say, how's the water? They go, oh, water's what we live in. Like, if you don't think about it, there's just a way of living in our culture that we're not even aware of. And so part of what the role of the Bible is, and part of what our role as a church is to kind of shake us out of, this is the way we normally live, but it's not normal. It's not what's best. It's not the way it should be. And this is what part of the transformed life looks like, where we're trying to see the world differently. And so when Paul's saying, don't be conformed to the pattern of this world, he's saying, wake up a little bit. Wake up to what's going on around you. Wake up to the places where you're just kind of naturally choosing to go along with the flow. Where you're not thinking at all about how this impacts other people or how it might impact your relationship with God. We're just living life concerned about us and making us happy. And Paul says, no, don't let that be the pattern that you fall into. Instead, choose to live a life where you're trying to be renewed in the way you think. A way that you could look at it is like, have a new mindset. Change the patterns of thought that you have. So instead of just waking up and going through your routines, is there ways that you can change your thought life? To think about the world the way God would see it. And as you go through your day and through the situations of life, instead of just like, it's normal for people to be super sarcastic and to tear people down. In those moments you stop and think, is this the way of Jesus? Or is there a different way of living where this isn't normal? Is there a different way of living where instead of bringing about death, there's a way of bringing about life? Where we build people up, where we speak life into them. Where instead of choosing to sin, we say, no, I'm dead to that life. There's a new way of living. As Pastor Chris has been talking about, I'm dead to sin. Sin's not my master. That's a thought process that we repeat and we train ourselves on. Because this new way of living requires a transforming of our mind. Because if we don't change the way we think, we will go along with whatever people tell us to think. And I see this in my own life. Like, I feel like social media is this just concentrated zone of here's how you should think. And what we tend to do is we tend to put ourselves in echo chambers, which is just the same people are telling us the same things. And so we get into a way of thinking where, oh, everybody must think like this because this is what everybody I know thinks. And so if you surround yourself, I feel like it happens so much with politics right now. So I feel like this is just the natural way that we look at it. If you surround yourself with people who are only thinking about the world in a conservative way, there's a shocking chance that you might only think about the world in a conservative way. And if you surround yourself with people who only think in a liberal way, then you're going to think only in a liberal way. And you're going to begin to think, this is the best way to think. This is the only way to think. This is the right way to think. And the way of Jesus says, maybe you have some biases, and maybe you could be wrong. Maybe there's a way that you live life that's a little bit liberal and a little bit conservative. And in that, you are actually representing Jesus instead of just being a political party. And our culture's like, don't say things like that. You walk the party line. I see it. Last Tuesday, red wave, blue wave. Just vote down the party line. Doesn't matter what they think. They have an R by the name. They have a D by the name. You vote for whatever party without thinking about who the people are. Without thinking about how they might. That's not the way of Jesus. That's not living life with a transformed mind, a transformed way of thinking. Because Jesus would say, hold on. Let's actually think about this. Let's actually think about how this actually will play out. Who this will impact beyond just you. Beyond just thinking about ourselves and the way things are. We say, you know what? I want to see the world where my first inclination is not to go, how does this impact me? But how does this impact others? And this is hard. And this is challenging. But when we go back to this question, is it actually possible to become like Jesus? I think we answer no, because I don't know that we actually believe it's possible to have a transformed mind. I don't think we believe it's actually possible for us to live a transformed life. And the Bible says it is. It's not easy, but there is this process where we choose to die to ourselves, where we choose to offer our bodies as a living sacrifice to Jesus. And in that process, he begins to change the way we think. But if we live our lives in a life of religion, we're like, okay, here's what I do. Here's all the boxes I have to check. I read my Bible today, but we're not inviting the Spirit of God to actually change us and transform us. We're not going to see the fruit. Because it's all about what we do. This wasn't planned, but Pastor Chris's sermon is like right on the money. Right? It's like there's a way of living by law, and there's a way of living by grace. And it's, how do we live? What life are we going to live into? Are we going to let God transform us? Because here's the thing. The way this is written, this is passive. You are not the one doing the transforming. It's God who is doing the transforming in you. It's a matter of, are you going to let him or not? Are you going to let him begin to transform your life? Are you going to let him change the way you see the world? Are you going to let him change the way you think about politics? Are you going to let you be a little bit more conservative or a little bit more liberal? Are you going to let him invade places that you hold on to? Are you going to let him blow your categories of what it looks like to be a follower of Jesus? Because here's the thing. The world's watching us. The people that go to school with you, they probably know that you go to church. Is there anything about your life that looks transformed? Is there anything about your life that makes them go, there's something different about them? Is there anything that shows that we're offering our lives as a living sacrifice to let Jesus do what he wants with it? If those things aren't evident, if we look exactly like them, I'm convinced of this. No one wants to be a Christian if all that we're offering them is more rules. If we're just offering them, hey, come to church, because we have a lot of more rules there, no one's going to be like, yeah, I'm up for that. I'd like a little more rules in my life. But if we go into the world and we say, man, there's a transformed way of living. There's a way that brings life. There's a way that changes just so much of the way I see the world, where I'm not a slave to all that other stuff. I don't worry about what people think of me. I don't have to achieve a certain level of status. I don't have to do this, that, or the other to feel a certain way about myself because of Jesus and the way he sees me and what he's done for me. And this way of living, he came and died for me. Like, if we can give them a picture of what a transformed life looks like, I guarantee that's going to have different results than, hey, you're a sinner, stop doing that sin. That's not how people want to be talked to. If we're like, hey, you're going to hell unless you change, that's not the way of a transformed life. We give them a picture, a glimpse of a better way of living. And we let Jesus do the work of transforming. And they see it in us. And they go, you know what? I want some of that. I want to experience that. It's not by something we do. It's what we let him do. And so here's what I want you to think about. This week, what would it look like for you to live a transformed life? What would it look like for you to offer your body as a living sacrifice? What would it look like for you to open up the way that you see the world and to just let Jesus be the filter you run your life through? It's tacky and it's cliche when he's that what would Jesus do thing, right? But in a sense, there's something to that. What do we see our world through? What lens are we putting on in the morning? If it's a lens that's focused on me, that's gonna decide how I choose to live my day. I'm gonna take the path of least resistance. I'm gonna choose the easiest way to live. I'm gonna look out for me. But Jesus is saying that's not a life that's transformed. That's a life like everyone else's. And so what would it look like for you this week to offer your body as a living sacrifice? And then secondly, how can you combat being conformed to the pattern of this world? How can you slow down this week? And instead of reacting the way you want to act or what comes most naturally, what if you slowed down and you said, okay, is this the way of Jesus? Is my response in this situation the way of Jesus? Because I don't want to just think like everyone else because that's what I'm told. I want to think like Jesus. I want to live this life that's transformed. So this week, how can you offer up your body as a living sacrifice? And how can you fight just going along with the flow? How can you combat being conformed to the pattern of this world? Let's pray. Jesus, thank you that you came to give us a life that is transformed. And it doesn't always feel like that. A lot of the times it feels like we're stuck, that we're stuck in a certain way of living. But because of your life and your death and your resurrection, there's a new reality that you're inviting us into. There's a new reality that says this isn't the way that it has to be. I don't have to be the victim. I don't have to worry so much about what other people think of me. I don't have to live that life. But Jesus, we have to let you transform us. So my prayer is that we would take steps towards that this week. We won't come back on Thursday or we won't come back next Sunday and have it all together and be perfect and maybe do what we think is what it should look like, but we can't come back having taken steps this week to offer our lives as a living sacrifice, to slow down, to not let ourselves be conformed to the pattern of this world, but to renew our minds and your new reality for us. Would you help us to catch a glimpse, to see a picture of a life transformed that we want for ourselves, not through our own effort, but through what you are wanting to do? Jesus, would we let you have our lives this week? We love you and we pray all these things in your holy and awesome and powerful name. Amen. Amen.